Welcome to the Online Success Journey podcast, your opportunity to discover and learn from entrepreneurs like yourself. This is not your typical podcast, but a place where you can get the real story and find out how real people encounter speed bumps and detours, but journey through to find success. Now here's your host for the Online Success Journey podcast, Patience.
Hello everyone and welcome to Online Success Journey. This is episode 217. Are you ready to join the class? Today we have Suzanne Brown, a strategist, marketing and a business consultant and work-life balance speaker, strategist and best-selling and award-winning author. Hello Susan.
Good morning and good afternoon. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. I know the client is anxious to hear your story, so let's get started with the basics. Can you tell my client a bit about your background, about what you did before you started your online business?
So I was in corporate America for about 12 years before I totally shifted over to becoming 100% entrepreneur. So I worked in mainly marketing agencies. So, the ad agency world that everyone thinks is very sexy and interesting, but it's also a really hard industry to be in. It's not necessarily very work-life balance friendly. And I worked for about 5 years, and then I went back and I got my MBA. And then I went and worked for a large engineering firm. I said I would never go back to the agency world after grad school. And then I went back to the agency world for about 6.5 years. But I worked for a company that was much more balance friendly. Honestly, I think that's the best way to describe it. And as I left grad school, walking out of the MBA program, I had somebody reach out to me and say, "Can you work on a project?" And I said, "Well, I have a job." And he's like, "That's great. I'm really glad for you. But can you just go ahead and work on this project for me?" And that was how I started my own business, because for the first 7 or 8 years of having a business, it was a side gig. And so I worked in the corporate world and had this side business for, like 7 or 8 years. And so it was interesting to manage those two things, because I worked in a full-time job while I still had this side thing going.
How did you manage? How was your timing of work, full-time job and then your side gig?
So I worked a normal full-time job, 9 to 5. The engineering company that I worked for really did kind of like, my day shut down pretty much at like 6. And I talked to my manager and I said, and ultimately it started because I said, "You don't pay me enough money." And he's like, "I've maxed out on my budget." And I said, "I'm an MBA. Here are the skills that I have. Here's what I bring to the table." And he's like, "That's great. I really want you on my team, but I literally can't give you any more money. Like, I have maxed out on what I can pay you." And I said, "So I need you to be flexible, and I'm going to start this other business," or I had already started the other business. And I said, "I need you to be flexible. So if I needed to go to lunch for 3 hours to meet with a client, he needed to be okay with that." And I would make up the time. But the point was, I didn't want to have to negotiate with him every single time I needed to have a meeting with a client, or maybe I needed to travel to go see a client. I didn't want it to have to be a negotiation for me to work from, remotely for a few days. So I negotiated that up front. But really, I maybe worked on my business for like 10 hours a week. So not a huge amount of time, but I had projects that essentially would take a much longer period than if I hadn't been working in a full-time job. I had clients who understood the circumstance that I was in. They appreciated the skills that I had. So even though they could have had somebody else do a project in, I don't know, we'll say a month, it was going to take me 2 or 3 months to work on the same project. But they said, "I want you for the skills you have, for the perspective you have, for what it is that you bring to the table." And I needed them to be a little more flexible. And yes, I worked on weekends when I needed to. I had some late nights when I needed to. You make it work. And when I went to go work for the marketing agency, because I switched from the engineering firm back to the marketing world, back to the marketing agency world after about 14 months. And I negotiated with my manager walking in. I said, here's the deal. I have a side business. Here are all the things. And the only the major agreement that we made was I would never work on a business that competed with a client that we had in the agency, which I thought was a totally reasonable request. But, I never, I was never, it's not like I had 3-hour lunches every day for 6 months, that might have happened every few months. So I didn't abuse the flexibility that I was given. And I always went above and beyond what I was supposed to be doing in my day job. So that way, if I needed a little bit of flexibility, it was fine.
Do you think you are lucky? Because no one can just move from one company to company and saying, you know what, I am here to work for you. You have to give me a job and pay me on my own terms. Don't you think are you being lucky or are you being too smart?
I think it's a little of both. I think I'm very much of the mindset of if you don't ask, the answer is no. So being able to know your value, what you bring to the table, what are your unique skills? What are the strengths that you have, especially in relation to what the company wants and needs? That is going to position you in a way that you can ask for flexibility, and that will allow you to understand what is it really that you have that other people don't. A lot of times we think what we do well, everybody does well. And that is often not the case. And so understanding really what you bring to the table can allow you that bit of negotiation. And, when I went into the engineering company, I was very open and honest in saying, you're just not paying me enough. That was the reality. Mm-hmm. And, maybe my manager would have said, hey, okay, well then I'm going to pay you X amount more. Like, what do you make in the course of a year? I'm going to match that. But he didn't say that. And he understood his limitations. He's like, I have maxed out on the budget for your level. I literally can't pay you any more money. And so that was an honest and open conversation that we had. But I also came to the table with, I gave 110% every day. It's not like I slacked off. I didn't. Like I came there to do a job and to do a job well, but he was not somebody who I knew. And versus when I went to work at the marketing agency, I had worked for my manager previously. I had worked for her when we both lived in New York City. And she knew what I brought to the table. She knew the skills. She knew my work ethic. So for her, she also said, well, I've maxed out on my budget, so I can't pay you any more money, but I'll give you the flexibility because I know you're going to do a good job. So that might have been a little bit more luck in that I was working for the same person again, but I also probably wouldn't have gone to work at that company if I hadn't have been working for her. But I think that there might be the fear of asking for that flexibility. And I mean, literally, if you don't ask for it, your manager isn't going to come to you and say, hey, I think that you might want a little bit of flexibility so that you can build your own business. Would you like that? No manager is going to say that ever.
Yeah, because you are walking in here, it's your first interview, you're like, I need this job. This is like people who are out there doing a 9-to-5 job or doing whatever days they are doing full time. You go there, you're like, please, I want to be hired. I need a full-time job. And you haven't worked there for 1 month or 2 months. And you're like, no, these are my terms. Because normally it's like you wait for like maybe 3 months or 2 months. And then you're like, these are my terms. Wow.
I think
that's being bold. But then as you said, if you know your value, what you bring to the table, then you are comfortable. You can go in and, be bold like that.
Yeah, but you also have to think about in the first conversations, I really kind of laid on what my strengths were, right?
Uh-huh.
And then as the hiring manager was like, this is the person who I want, and he made me an offer, and that's when I was able to negotiate, right? Like I didn't come to the table saying take it or leave it. I came to the table showing my best, this is who I am, this is what I do, these are my strengths, this is how I can bring value to your team. And then as we started the negotiation, that's when we had that open conversation about you're just not going to pay me enough. So it, you can kind of figure out the right moment to have those conversations. Instead of it being like you bring it to the table, it's the very first thing that they say to you, that you say to them, and they're like, oh, never mind.
Oh.
So,
the interview is over.
Yeah, so you have to feel out when is the right moment. And to be quite blunt, some companies don't appreciate that you have a side gig. It happens that in marketing agencies, it's a pretty standard thing. A lot of people have freelancing businesses on top of whatever it is that they do inside the agency. So it's a very standard way of doing business. So in that particular industry, no one was really upset about my doing it, except for the terms of, we don't want you to work for a competitor, which again, totally makes sense. So if you work for a company it's a big no-no to have a side gig, you might have to have a little bit of it be, I don't want to say have a secret, but you might not want to come out and say, well, I need you to be more flexible, right? You're going to have to kind of feel out that situation.
Thank you for sharing. You've been in business for a long time in the marketing and doing your own business. Why do you do what you do?
So ultimately what it comes down to in either business that I have is I love to solve problems. I think of it almost as like figuring out a puzzle. So whether it's the strategic marketing stuff that I do, where ultimately I'm trying to help somebody figure out a business challenge that marketing can help with, and being able to break down what's behind that problem and then figure out a solution to that. Or whether it's the work-life balance side where there is something that's not quite working correctly. So I can try to problem solve and figure out like, what is it that's getting in this person's way? But it comes down to problem solving. So it's just naturally how my brain works. And being able to problem solve for people or for companies is, it's just a super interesting thing for me personally. So it's nice that I can do that for a living.
Let's put man aside. How do you know you are successful?
My definition of success is largely about my energy level and where I'm able to spend my time, and the fact that I am a mother and I am able to pick up my boys at the end of their school day. So yes, there are dollars going into my bank account, but if I was working so hard that I never saw my family, then I wouldn't actually consider myself successful. So it's being able to have that balance where I get the income, but I also have a life.
Can anyone be an entrepreneur, or are some people more cut out for it than others?
I very much feel that not everyone is made to be an entrepreneur. And there are certain elements that go along well with entrepreneurship. That ability to problem solve, the ability to think on your feet. You have to be open to risk. You have to be a risk taker. There's that need you constantly have to build a pipeline. And so not everybody is comfortable in all of those things. And you kind of have to be comfortable in all of those things to really be able to build a business. So people definitely look at me sometimes and say, what do you mean not everyone can be an entrepreneur? But really, not everyone is designed to be an entrepreneur. And I guess some of those things can be learned. But I think a lot of them are things that you kind of have to be comfortable with, even if someone is able to kind of bring them out over time, right? Like somebody can't, if you are not open to risk, somebody cannot make you open to risk. Like that has to be something that you are comfortable with. And somebody can make that come to the surface, but no one can create it in you, right?
What have you learned from business as a whole?
I think so much of business is really based on relationships. it doesn't matter whether you're working with larger companies or whether you're working with other solopreneurs. It ultimately comes down to building relationships, building trust, and a lot of times that takes time. You know, it's you might meet somebody at a holiday party, and 2 years later you're working on a project together. So much is that relationship. And, you know, and then it's even better when you can marry it with the right timing. So, but it's not, you can't really force projects. You can't force relationships to happen. They just kind of have to take their own pace, which can be frustrating. But I think that, you know, when we ultimately think about your problem solving for people, whether they are, you know, as a small business or as a really large company, but people don't want you to problem solve if you don't have a relationship with them first.
If someone is just there listening and being anxious, you know, okay, I would like to really talk to those people. I like to go to the seminars, but approaching someone, what advice can you give them?
You know, I think some of it has to do with do what feels natural. So if you hear something that somebody says at an event and it really resonates with you, maybe you're not comfortable walking up to that person and saying, you know, hey, John, hey, Mary, that was a really great point. Thanks for making that and starting up a conversation. Maybe you're going to be more comfortable doing it through LinkedIn or doing it via email. Or maybe you meet somebody and you read an article and you say, you know, I think this person would really appreciate this article, and you send it to them, and in your own voice, you say, hey, you know, after we had that conversation at, you know, Mary's birthday party, I thought you might really enjoy this. Or it might be that you're super comfortable just almost like cold calling, and you see somebody who's connected to someone you know on LinkedIn, and you're like, hey, can you make a connection with me? And you just reach out to that person and say, I'd like to take you to coffee. I really enjoy what you have to say, or I think we'd be we'd be complimentary. It all depends on your own natural abilities and inclinations. And so you don't need to follow somebody else's path. You know, just do something that feels more natural. And you can do all kinds of things online. Like you can even have, you know, a happy hour or a coffee online and meet somebody in another country or in another city. So there's so many different ways to do it, but do what's comfortable, because that will ultimately seem natural and it will seem more genuine.
What is one thing no one knows about you?
So many people know that I'm a travel enthusiast. I'm an avid international traveler. But I traveled to 40 countries before I turned 40. Wow. So that was a goal that I set for myself, and then I made it happen.
How did you do that?
Even with kids. You know, I actually did a lot of solo travel when I was, especially after I finished grad school. Mm-hmm. I didn't have people to travel with me. And so I said, I'm just going to travel by myself. If I can't find people to go with me, that's not going to stop me from traveling. So I love adventure. I love exploring. So I did a lot of it by myself. We also traveled a lot when I was growing up. We would kind of pick I shouldn't say my parents would pick a country, and then we would spend time in that country during the summer. So a lot of that happened without my necessarily having any say in where we went. But when I started traveling by myself, then I had lots of say in where I went. But then at I think it was the final country, maybe the final two, I traveled there with my husband and our young boys. And so even if you have a family, you can continue to travel. You know, I definitely get questions sometimes with people saying, you know, but how am I going to continue to travel if I have a family? And it's like, okay, it's going to be a little more expensive, but it's still totally doable. You know, we travel with our boys internationally like every other year, maybe. Mm-hmm. And our boys love the adventure. But it's something we've worked on over time. You know, I compare it to like a muscle you have to build.
Oh, you just mastered the plan. I think parents maybe sometimes they are worried like when you go to the airport, checking in these kids, dragging one and then the other one, everyone becomes chaos. So I'm glad you have mastered the art of the work going through the airport. So you need to keep sharing. Wow. How do mentors and sponsors help entrepreneurs?
This is an area that I don't think we talk enough about in the entrepreneurial world, especially as startups. And maybe you do talk about mentorship because mentorship, mentors are really the people who can guide you. They can help you make the right decisions for your situation. They can help you, they can answer your questions. They can be there to really help you understand what are the things that are going to move your business forward. So, and there are all kinds of mentorship programs in pretty much every city that you can think of, in every town you can think of. There's probably some kind of formal mentorship program. And I bet you could easily find an informal one in, Facebook groups, in LinkedIn groups, in the city where you live. They're all around. The thing that we don't spend enough time and energy on is sponsors. Because sponsors are the people who actually take action on your behalf. So they're the people who open doors. They're the people who might help you get funding for your business. And those are not the people who you ask to help guide you. Those are the people who you ask to take action, right? And so sponsors can really not just open a door and help you up level a business. These are people who can help you, make major shifts in your company, and they can help you find clients and maybe even team members, the right kinds of employees for your business as you grow. And so it becomes you have to be able to understand who is really a better mentor versus who is a sponsor, because you're not going to have 10 sponsors. Like you might have 5 or 10 people on your own personal board of directors, your own personal mentors. I think a sweet spot is to have like 3 or 4, but you're really only going to have 1, maybe 2 sponsors. So it's finding people who can be in each of those roles and do what it is that you need to do. And when it comes to sponsors, you are trying to build on their legacy, not necessarily build on your own. It just happens that they're helping you helps with their own legacy. It helps them do whatever it is that they're trying to achieve. So being able to have strategic conversations with people, maybe even people who you worked with in a past life in a larger company, you never know where those relationships will go. So really it comes down to the need to maintain your network and to not, even though you've moved into your own business and maybe you're not doing things related to what you did in the past, but you still want to maintain those relationships. You still want that to be a live network.
What is the most valuable thing your mentors or sponsors has told you?
Recently, I was thinking about going back to the corporate world. I know, shocking.
After
when I
years?
Actually, like 12 years.
Mm-hmm.
What I've discovered is entrepreneurship it can be lonely for someone who's an extrovert. And I went to each of my mentors, who actually also happened to do a little bit of the role of sponsors as well. And I said, I'm thinking about going back to the corporate world. What are some of the things that I can do to position myself in the right way? And I had this as 2 separate conversations, but they both were like, "Are you crazy? What is the matter with you?" Now, mind you, both of these are men and they lead very large organizations. So they are not at all entrepreneurs. But they actually talked to me about, instead of going back to the corporate world, what you really need to do is you need to make some major shifts and grow your company faster. And it was a very interesting insight because their whole point was, instead of going to an organization to feel more of that connection to your team, it's time for you to grow your own team. And that was a very helpful conversation because it met the same goals as what it was that I was looking for. And so I have started to lay more of that foundation to change, to make things happen differently in 2020. But I will say both of them said the same thing, not in the exact same words, but in very similar words of, yeah, no, that's not going to happen.
Oh, that's good. Why is work balance important for entrepreneurs?
Ultimately, as an entrepreneur, especially someone who is starting a business or who has a small business and you're having to do a lot of things, you can burn out. I mean, it's just that simple. And it's a lot harder to come back from burnout than it is to start to create more work-life balance so that you have that downtime to offset all of the things that you're trying to make happen. Because as an entrepreneur, so many people think, oh, I'll become an entrepreneur and I'll have work-life balance. No, you work really hard as an entrepreneur, especially as you're starting your business. So you can work more normal, we'll call them normal hours, but it's going to take you longer to make things happen. Or you can work a lot of hours to try to quickly make things come together. And so you still need to have things like self-care. You still need to have downtime. You've got to fill your cup on a regular basis, or all of that time that you're spending, you're just going to run yourself into the ground, and then you're just going to stop. It's like you're going to hit a wall, and it's really hard to start to move again once you hit that wall.
So what advice would you give us then to work smarter so we can still have time with our friends and family and still enjoy our business?
So when it comes to working smarter, I think part of that is based on literally how you work. So as an entrepreneur, you are generally more in control of your time. So you're able to work when it makes sense, and you're able to work how it makes sense. So most of us develop our habits for work either in like college, maybe a few years before college, or in the very first few years of working. So most of us are not taught how to work based on our own natural tendencies. So for example, we are not taught about peak productivity. And peak productivity is essentially when you naturally hit your groove. So for me personally, for example, it's kind of first thing in the morning. So literally after I've dropped off my boys to school, that is when I am at my best. So I have a natural high in the morning. I don't even need to drink coffee, but it's when I naturally am like, okay, I'm ready to go. I have all of my ideas. And so at that point, during my peak productivity, I'm not going to sit and read email and send email out. I'm not going to do 5 things on my to-do list. I'm going to work on my hardest challenges, the things that are the most important, the things for my client that require the most brain power. I'm going to work on my business, maybe not in my business, right? Like when I'm trying to do business development. When I was writing my 2 books, that was when I did my writing. But a lot of times when people naturally hit their groove, they're like, oh, I'm going to check off a bunch of things on my to-do list. The truth is, you can check off those things on your to-do list all throughout the day. You don't need to use your peak productivity to do that. But you need to figure out when your peak productivity is in order to be able to make the most of it. So maybe you need a few cups of coffee. Maybe it's in the evening, so you're more of a night owl. So maybe you can kind of shift your time back a little bit. Maybe it's in the afternoon. Like there are all kinds of times of the day when you can have your peak productivity. But the way to figure it out is take a day, take 2 days, I would say. Clear off all the meetings on your schedule. And literally just see when you naturally hit your groove. Just do like what you would normally do. And when you see that probably 2 or 3 hours, that is your peak. And you want to make sure that you do your most strategic things during that peak productivity instead of to do those most strategic things throughout the day. Because if your brain power is at its best in that peak productivity, you want to use it, right?
Yeah.
So there's that part. And then the other part is you want to be able to use your work time and the fringes of your time both strategically. So, for example, some people do really well with batching, which is essentially where you do like things together. And I'm almost positive you've other people have talked about this on in other episodes. But when you're doing that batching and that batching time, there will also be these fringe moments that you have throughout your day. So maybe those are the ideal times for you to go and strategically look at social media, right? Versus saying, oh, well, I'm just going to touch social media throughout the day, and then you might go down the black hole that is social media. Or maybe you use Pomodoro technique, which is where you work for 25 minutes and then you have a break for 5 minutes. But instead of doing nothing in that 5 minutes, what if that's when you did your social media? Or maybe that's when you put a load of wash in your washing machine. You know, you want to use that time strategically, but you want to do both sides strategically. So the downtime as well as the other time. And part of it, honestly, can be really helpful to use your calendar, because if it's not on your calendar, it's not going to happen. And I'm going to give one more tip, and that is so much of making the most of your day happens the night before. So every Sunday, I look at my week and I figure out what are all of the things that I need to be able to achieve this week. And so I kind of line up my goals for the week and have an idea for what are my goals and what are my strategies more or less for hitting those goals every day. So here's the number one thing I want to be able to do on Monday. Here are the kind of top 3 to 5 things I want to be able to do, including that number one thing. And I line those up for the week. And that way you're able to see, oh, I have to go to a lunch meeting on Tuesday. I've got to go to an event on Wednesday starting at 3, like whatever the things are. But that way you're able to make adjustments throughout your week because of these blocks of time that you have or because of deadlines you have for a client. And then that takes about 15 to 20 minutes. And then each night I take about 10 to 15 minutes to plan for my next day. So yes, on Sunday, it's going to end up being a little bit longer, but that way you can make the adjustments that you need to make on a daily basis, because you will have things thrown your way. You will have new information, new things from clients, new opportunities, whatever it is. But if you've done this plan for the week, you're able to prioritize and then reprioritize as new stuff comes your way.
Is this your secret for being successful?
That is definitely one of the most important things that I do in order to make the most out of my week. People always say, well, how do you manage 2 businesses? How are you a mom? And then you shut down your day by 2:30. And it's because I do this plan for the week and I'm able to know what is it that I need to be able to achieve each day in order to do what it is that I need to do, in order to turn in that deadline, in order to practice the presentation that I have for a workshop or whatever. I have all of those things laid out. And so between using my calendar and planning my day the day before so that in the morning I can hit the ground running, that makes a huge difference in how I can actually fit it all in.
What grounds you?
It really comes down to spending time with my family. So for all of the things that I might do and I might be super excited about something, when my boys are like, look at the Lego that I built. They don't necessarily care about what it is that I'm working on. And it reminds me to kind of relax, to be able to have those easygoing moments. But I will also say they're always listening. So in those moments that I might be having a hard time, for them to be able to say to me, Mommy, you can do it, because that's something that I would say to them. So I think it's very helpful to have other people, and it's often my family, whether it's my kids or my husband, but having something that's not related to work, having those things that you can look at and just be totally present and in the moment really matters.
Let's talk about your business, Mompowerment. Tell us more about it.
So Mompowerment is all about helping companies become more balance friendly and helping working moms and a little bit of working dads are in there too, helping working dads create more of the balance that they crave. And I will say the reason why I created this business was ultimately because I saw something missing in the marketplace. And so lots of times people will ask, how do you come up with inspiration for starting a business? Literally, there was a gap in the marketplace. And so I figured out how I wanted to solve that gap, to present a new solution for what I saw that was out there. And I wrote it all started because I wrote 2 books, or I started with 1 book, I should say, which was on how to successfully transition to a part-time role. And when I wrote that first book, I interviewed more than 110 working moms to write that book. And after I put it out into the world, I had lots of working moms come to me and say, that's great. I'm super excited that you wrote this book. I'm sure this is a great book. I'm never going to read it. They said, I need a book. I want tips and tricks and hacks. And I said, well, they're in this book. And they're like, that's great. I'm super excited. But it says part-time on it. I'm never going to go part-time. It doesn't matter that there are great tips in here. What about a book for me? And again, there was a need in the marketplace. And so I wrote a second book to meet the needs of that audience. So I think sometimes as entrepreneurs, we might think that something that we do really well, everybody should do it well. But that is not often the case. And so being able to see what we do well versus what is needed in the marketplace for a specific audience, and there you have a business, right? So that is essentially kind of the backbone of Mompowerment.
And who can join your mom empowerment? The startups, the middle, the 1.7, the 6-figure. Who can join your program?
Ultimately, there is not necessarily a program in place. So it's more of there are books there are the 2 books that are available, and those are even available on Amazon, so you can easily find them. And I will say that I've had a lot of people come to me recently who are entrepreneurs and have said, I realize this book is specifically for moms, but I got a lot out of it, and I'm never going to be a parent.
Oh, no. What is the name of the book? By the way, you haven't mentioned the book, so I don't need to read it.
So the first book, if you want to learn more about the part-time side of things, is called literally just Mompowerment. And the subtitle is Insights from Successful Professional Part-Time Working Moms Who Balance Career and Family. But you can easily find it just by searching for Mompowerment on Amazon. And then the second one is The Mompowerment Guide to Work-Life Balance. And I won't mention the subtitle because with that, you'll be able to easily find it. But those 2 books can just be very helpful because they're just full of tips. Like I literally just put in tips from all of the interviews that I did. And then beyond that, the other thing that I do is one-on-one sessions. So sometimes I will have larger companies come to me and pay for a day where I will go and do a strategy session with them, or I'll have people come to me literally just for an hour and say, I want to be able to do a one-on-one session because I'm not using my time efficiently, or I need to rework my morning routine, or whatever it is. And so I don't consider myself a coach with long-term relationships. It's more of meeting with somebody a few times online. So meeting is a generic term, but where I will meet with somebody once or twice, and we'll kind of work through a specific couple of challenges, and we create a strategy for them, and then and then that's it, and they can take that and start making changes. So pretty simple.
But what made those people who read this book and said they don't want to be parents? What is in there in that book?
So, when you create anything, you have to have an audience in mind. right? You have to create something for a specific target. So in my case, my target is working mothers and who need to be able to ultimately maximize their time, right? And my audience specifically is professional working mothers. And so when other people have gotten this book, ultimately they are trying to maximize their time. They're trying to be the most efficient with what it is that they are trying to create. So when I talk about tips related to time management or being more intentional, or how do you engage a mentor or create and maintain relationships with sponsors, all of those things as entrepreneurs are needed. You know, it's not like, oh, well, I don't need any of those things because I'm an entrepreneur and I don't have a family or don't want a family or whatever it is. It just happens that the people who I interviewed and the people who I wrote the book for, or the books for, are working mothers, right? And so that's why other people have gotten a lot out of it. It's not necessarily written for them, but it's not that you have to be a mom in order to get the most out of the book.
Thank you for clarifying, because I was just getting worried. Okay. Where can we find the book and how can we connect with you?
So the books are available on Amazon, and you can find me pretty much everywhere with the handle Mompowerment. So think like empowerment, but with MOM at the beginning. So, and you can easily get connected to all of the other places on mompowerment.com.
So, Clan, there will be more from Susan in a moment. If you are listening on one of the many podcasting platforms rather than my website and you are encouraged by Susan's journey, go to onlinesuccessjourney.com for a bonus portion of the interview. The Online Success Journey is a wonderful membership community built for people searching for the path to success. We are one big clan and can be part of this community for free. Once you have joined the clan, click on part 2 of Susan's journey or over 200 plus other journeys that are available and learn how you can find the right path for your own online success journey. That's a wrap, clan. Remember, success is a journey. Patience and Susan.
This is not the end of the journey. We hope you've enjoyed listening to part 1 and want to be sure you know there is a second part to this and every journey podcast at onlinesuccessjourney.com, filled with even more success tips, uplifting stories, and even a bit of fun. There are dozens of episodes only available to the members of the Online Success Journey clan. Check out the website and click on Join the Clan for more information. Patience would like to thank you for listening to this podcast, and she has a free audio gift for you at her website. Go to onlinesuccessjourney.com for instant access to this gift. Of course, you know that listening to the journeys of others helps each of us chart our own path. So make sure you're subscribed to be notified as each new interview is posted. There are so many ways to stay connected to the Online Success Journey and to listen in. And if you're enjoying the podcast, we appreciate your help in telling others. One of the best ways to share the benefit you get is to rate and review it at Stitcher and other sites by clicking the stars or completing the ratings form, by clicking thumbs up and leaving a comment on YouTube, or liking and sharing the podcast on social media. To review the podcast within iTunes, simply open iTunes to the podcast, click on Ratings and Reviews, then write a review. On behalf of Patience, and until next time, thanks once more for listening. It is our hope that this podcast will guide you on your own online success journey.